Hello everyone. My name is Anjul Pratyush. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Think Talent, and I will be the host for this conversation. Our guest for today's conversation is Ms. Ranjabati Shom. Ranja currently works as the General Manager, Talent and OD at Schneider Electric Energy and Sustainability Services. In her stint at Schneider, Ranja has been responsible for conceptualizing and executing on a wide range of talent and learning initiatives. I personally had an experience of working closely with her on a learning accelerator program for middle managers, where I could closely see her ability to partner with external and internal stakeholders to improve the digital quotient of the program and really scale up its coverage in terms of participants and geography. Ranja has also worked prior to her stint at Schneider in a wide range of interesting roles, including as a clinical psychologist in the healthcare space, as a consultant, and in talent and OD roles in reputed organizations. So, Ranja, welcome to this conversation and looking forward to hearing your perspectives and views today.
Thank you, Anjul, for having me.
Great. So Ranja, one interesting thing about Schneider Electric is that every time I go to one of your offices, I see messaging around EcoStruxure platform and your IoT-based solutions. So as an organization, you seem to be to be very focused on this whole leveraging digital. But how has been your experience in leveraging digital on the learning and talent, area? Can you share a few examples of that?
So thanks, Anjul, for the question. But interesting that you all are using, the present tense of the word leveraging. I think at Schneider, we're very happy to claim that, it is in the past tense for us, but also, of course, continuing to leverage because I remember, for example, when I had joined now close to 5 years ago, which was, of course, pre-COVID, um, we already had very strong imperatives on not only making learning digital, but at least blended, and completely moving away from just a classroom approach. And I was very impressed with that. And of course, COVID lent itself to increasing that more and more. But um, I think that has really helped us build that mindset. And I'm very proud of the way that our leadership, even our employees, going to learning interventions today, expecting a digital component. And that is really, a measure of success in that sense. And of course, we have closely interacted on our program OJAS before, which today is one of, I think, the primary examples of how we have adopted digital on both the TM and the learning side, because of course this is a talent management learning journey. And again, the challenge posed was a simple one. Year of COVID, people don't have the privilege, the time to sit in front of their screens and even go through virtual classrooms, which are long and tedious. So what can we do? And I think what we did at the time, and again, given that we were working around whatever ecosystem that we had, we learned instructional design, or rather, we learned how to create a digital learning path using technology. So we use something called Blended X. And it was very interesting because you have to keep in mind learner persona. So, put in, for example, podcasts, put in movie clips, put in news articles, but everything has to appeal to everybody. And I think that was my biggest learning really of how something as standard as a leadership journey can be made completely digital. And then, of course, you pair it up with connected sessions, you pair it up with leadership connects, and so on and so forth. And again, I think the success of that blend, if I can call it, is the fact that we continue to have that learning path. It wasn't just for that year. We continue to have it. We continue to build on it. So I think that was one very good example that really stood out for me. And another one that actually was more recent, and again, this goes back uh, to the whole topic of power skills. So at Schneider, we call behavioral skills power skills. So things like communication, stakeholder management, consulting mindset. And again, what was the traditional approach? The traditional approach was that you get somebody into the classroom, have them there for a full day, have them put an out of office that they are in a training program, or in some cases even 2 days. But we have lost that privilege. And I think more than losing that privilege, I think we have lost that mind share, right? People are not interested in sitting in a classroom for 2 days and then just, going away with the expectation that, hey, now let's go and apply it. And, we'll come back to you 3 months later and see how you've applied it. That format didn't really sit well with us, and we experimented a little bit to see how we can do shorter cycles, how we can get people again onto a platform, and that's what we did. So again, in partnership with another, a close vendor that we work with, we did something called the Power Skills Learning Journey, where they start off with a connected masterclass, again virtual, so very easy to consume on wherever you are in this whole work from anywhere world that we are living in. And that is matched up with the entire learning journey being on this one digital platform. So you feel connected because you're on the same platform, but whether it is a practice session, whether it is an assignment that you are submitting, whether it is a leaderboard to see, who's doing it faster than you, all of it is digital. And I was very skeptical because again, coming from a psychology background, behavioral skills, there's no touch and feel. How is it going to be? But I'm very happy to say that it worked, and I think it worked because when we were able to, first of all, leaders came back to us and said that, what, we're actually seeing these skills playing out at work during meetings and interactions, and then they were more keen to adopt because it was such a very easily scalable and an easy way to, I don't know, make the best use of your time. So even when we're pitching this to a leader, when he or she wants to work on the skills development, they don't have to invest, 12, 14, 16 hours. It's just very shorter cycles that they are much, much happier to invest. I love this topic of the agility imperative. And the agility imperative for us in an organization like Schneider becomes so important because today we are a workforce of 35,000 plus, and that's just in India. So if our solutions are not scalable, and if our solutions do not, um, lend itself to an agility imperative, we will fail. Because in everything we have to be quick, we have to adapt it to these 35,000 different personas that we have, and that's the only way we will achieve scalable success in that sense. So I think these are some of the ways, and like I said, it does continue. Of course, it's not totally in the past for us, but these are some of the ways in which we have looked to adopt digital into our current practices, and we continue to experiment on this.
Right. Well, and interesting that you mentioned the example of adapting the program during the COVID window and later continuing with it. But what we see across organizations, Ranja, is that businesses are increasingly asking HR teams that for more faster responses to business issues, because businesses are themselves getting forced to respond continuously to new emerging issues, market trends and so on. And your example around being able to adapt the program to a new format to respond to the emerging context of COVID and work from home was a great example. But are there any other examples? For example, in an organization like Schneider, there are other priorities that are continuously emerging. We see sustainability, for example, coming up as a key priority and, reflecting in the messages, across different kinds of leadership, initiatives that we see. So how are you able to also adapt your learning portfolio and quickly being able to reach out, like you said, to a very large group of people and build awareness around some of these issues that are getting prioritized and focused on from a leadership and business perspective?
And I think, and that is very interesting. And see, for us, honestly, sustainability is in our DNA. So for us, it's, I think agility is more of an imperative than sustainability today because sustainability is a given for us. It has to happen in each and everything that we do. But when it comes to um, leveraging, for example, various aspects or various trends, let's say, in the industry, in order to make our offer from HR, learning, TM, whatever it may be, more agile, um, I think there are two primary things that we have to look at. And again, this has come from a lot of experimentation, a lot of piloting. I think the first thing is that as a community, we have to lower our expectations, So um, it is very idealistic for us to sit and think that, we will, quote unquote, dictate or direct the learning offer. And this is the age old conundrum between push versus pull, right? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from learning or is it coming from the business? But gone are the days, Arjun, where managers are going to nominate employees and then employees are going to attend a program. Um, it is a completely self-service approach that this generation and even the previous generation actually goes for. So today, for example, if an employee of mine wants to learn something, they will just go on YouTube, they will go on Google, and they will just learn it. They are not going to wait for us as a learning team to design something, put together a batch of 18 people, and then deliver that. So just imagine, if my learner is becoming so agile and if my learner is becoming so quick, then what are the things that I need to do to, at the same time, encourage that self-service approach? But the pitfall of that being, how do I tie it back to my organizational objectives, right? Because I can give them, the moon and the sun when it comes to learning offers and programs and platforms. But at the end of the day, I need to tie it back to what my business imperatives are. A very interesting example again, and we just concluded our 1 year pilot on that, and happy to say successfully so, was that at a global level, and this was especially true for our technical talents in India as well, we partnered with Coursera, which I'm sure you're aware, it's an edge tech platform. And we gave all the technical roles full access to the platform. And again, there were questions on whether we should restrict, etc. But then I am not the right person, for example, for to determine which technology should a software analyst in my organization, access. And it can be, 10, it can be 100, it can be 1,000. And that's what we encourage through something that we call lifelong learning. So we gave them full access, but along with that, what we did was we worked with Coursera and our internal subject matter experts, both at the global and a local level, to build in Schneider electric learning paths within Coursera. Okay. So, for example, say I'm a data scientist and I log into Coursera and I do maybe a data science course from MIT, I get a certificate for it. I do a course on Python, say, to learn how to do machine learning, anything. But at the same time, I will also get a nudge saying, hey there, here is a Schneider Electric data science learning path. So at the same time, we are simplifying it for them. And we're also contextualizing, encouraging them and saying that, yes, absolutely self-service, go for it, whatever you want to learn. But you know what? If you want to bring it back to the organization, here are one or two, three, four, five learning paths that will help you with that. And I think that is an imperative, right? Because like I said, unless we tie it back to our objectives, to our strategy being met, learning will not otherwise be successful. So I think that's one thing in how we support businesses, I think, to be a little bit more agile.
Right.
And the second example that I can perhaps use is, again, not a new one, personalization, right? So, this is the DIY or the do-it-yourself generation. So they are going to consume on their own. They are going to consume at a pace that they like. But as a learning and a talent community, how are we, I think, enabling that mentality? How are we, and most importantly, how are we using technology as an enabler? I think to be more agile, and that is truly a learning journey. So of course you have the basics in place. For example, you have machine learning running in our internal LMS. So, just like a Netflix or a Hotstar, the more you search for something, the more related recommendations you will get. And I'm sure, most organizations have this today. But we also have something that we have called persona-based learning. So each of us have a very unique job code today, which is a combination of letters that essentially identifies which part of the organization I belong to, etc. So me as a learning and TM leader, if I were to log into the platform, I will get recommendations around, say, what are the talent trends for 24 that HBR is speaking of, or what are the hottest things in instructional design that 2023 left us with. So in that sense, I don't have to go looking for things, right? So I'm making that a little bit more quick. I'm making that a little bit more personalized. And of course, as we progress, we want to make it more and more sophisticated. I'm sure other organizations have already done so. So I think, yeah, it's interesting because digital changes so much that the concept of agility becomes almost like sustainability. It almost becomes a given. But I think we also have to keep experimenting and keep piloting to see what works and what doesn't work, and be equally agile in being able to, delete what will not work for us.
Right. No, and great examples, Ranja, also because, a key, issue with being agile as an organization is also to build a culture where employees and individuals are continuously learning and upgrading themselves. That is how the organization can be agile and can move quickly, and some of these examples you mentioned, point out to a great, mix, which is that put the learner in the driver's seat, and put a enabling mechanism, so this, enable discovery through platforms like Coursera, put personalization at the background so that learners are able to discover relevant content more easily, be available to support them if required, but let them drive it. That is something which is a very philosophical change, which is still a leap to be made by many organizations. I can hear from your examples that at least to a fair degree you have been able to take that leap, at least in terms of putting your employees in the driver's seat for many of these in many of these initiatives. That takes me, Ranja, to the next question, which is that uh, conceptually some of these things have been known for a fair bit, that need to go digital, that need to be more agile in your approach to learning portfolio design, putting employees in the driver's seat. But we still see HR teams, struggling to take these, philosophical approaches and get initiatives off the ground. And there are significant execution related challenges that still remain as you try and get adoption within the organization. So, in your experiences as you have driven these initiatives, what have been some of the learnings in terms of getting the right sponsorship with these programs and getting adoption from the participant cohorts?
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I think the challenge continues to be honest, Ranjul. And, especially, so I am, of course, lucky that I belong to that unique generation where we have seen both analog and digital, right? So, in some sense, we are able to understand both. So, in some sense, we're able to customize for both. But we're soon going into generations where they don't know what a cassette player was, right? So we have to, it's digital or die. So um, sponsorship is so important. And again, with sponsorship, there is the more traditional, or I would say, the more typical approach of leaders being sponsors. And even though it is a traditional approach, I am still a strong cheerleader of it because from a culture point of view, um, and I will speak on behalf of Indians here, from a culture point of view, Indians still emulate their leadership, right? And I think that's an amazing thing to do, right? Because you have to have some kind of aspiration when you need to know how you want to grow. And I'm not generalizing, of course. I'm saying some Indians still do. And therefore, we continue in terms of adoption. I think we continue to look towards our leaders as sponsors. Any messaging that we do, And that is also an easier group to kind of reach out to, because ultimately it is their business imperative that we are going to solve, right? So they are equally invested in it in that sense. But at the same time, and again, to pivot to being more agile, to being more fast paced, I think we also need to tap into the ambassadors of digital, which is today, your natives and your younger generations, which is easily more than 50% of our workforce today. So what do they think of it? Because if in a group of 20, I can get even five of them, just about interested in it, I can actually use them as ambassadors for the rest of the 15 and then scale, right? So that's also a very interesting approach that we do, because, before, I remember the first thing when it was messaging, we used to make a leadership list, and now we make a young talent list, so it just goes hand in hand, because we need the organization to hear from both voices. It is as simple as that. But I think, are there challenges? Yes, definitely. When it comes to adoption, when it comes to, sometimes the sustainability of the adoption, there are challenges. And I think, um, and forgive me for saying this on this platform, but I think as an HR community, we are not innately technical or digital when it comes to design, right? That is not how we have been taught, perhaps. And I don't know, maybe now curricula is different in universities. But for example, so when I design a leadership journey, right, I will be more concerned about which psychometric am I using, what are the competencies that I'm building into the development center, how is this going to further the career path of the leaders that I am targeting. We look at methodology, don't get me wrong, but I think for us that primary design comes first, right? And I think we need to now flip that completely. And that's when we, bring in the digital native, saying that, okay, fine, we have experts who will build the design, but how is this being delivered to a generation that learns differently, or to a world that operates differently? So, how are you building in a podcast, for example? Are you using something as common as a popular meme reference, that will help recall? So I think these design principles, and ultimately delivering a product that has the best of both, I think that's going to be the success, really, in terms of uh, being being digital, as well as, making something that is scalable. And the best way to do that is to bring in teams that are multi-generational. So I will always encourage, and, and let your kind of pride drop and say that, hey, you know what? I am not as digitally native as you are. So can I please bring in somebody much younger into my team, who will view the same thing with a completely different lens, and therefore be able to give that a product back to the audience, which has a amazing aspect of everything, in terms of the strength of the design, in terms of strength of the delivery, different learning styles, different talent segments, for example. And we have a strong focus on building early careers, of course, in Schneider. But it is that multi-generational, and not just concentrating on the young talent, but also seeing what the senior talent and what experience has also brought to the table. I think it is a very healthy blend of all of that, that we need to continue to, make sure that the adoption stays relevant.
No, great. Thank you, Ranja. I think, like I said in the beginning, HR teams, that we speak to understand that digital is important, but some of these insights and concrete examples, I think that you shared, can be a good guidepost for them as they review and refresh and look to refresh their own portfolios and initiatives, and be ready for a more digital world. So thanks again for being here today and for sharing your insights. Thank you.
Most welcome, Anjul, and, wishing the Think Talent team a very, very successful and bright 2024 ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ranja.